My name's Mike Gambone, and I teach at Kutztown University. I'm just finishing up my 30th year here, so it went really fast. This has become kind of like a third career for me. Um, I started doing Latin American history, but I was on sabbatical a long time, about 8 years ago. Ran into a friend, and I'm sure most of you guys have somebody like this, who they believe in every single conspiracy that ever existed, and they send you links and updates and YouTube and all the rest of it. And I had no idea this stuff even existed, honestly, because I'm in my bubble. Um, so it got me curious, and I conjured up a class. I started offering it, and right now, this semester, I have 140 students who signed up for it. So the class became the book I'm using in class. And I found out that people are really, really, really interested in this. Um, and I could even add more to that because in 2020, I decided to volunteer to work at polling places and found plenty of conspiracies in the election. People were walking up to me, papers in hand, trying to show them to me while they voted. And I've seen that ever since, actually, matters a degree, but I'm still working at the polls. I'm looking forward to exactly the same thing this year. Not really happy about it, but I think having discussions about this in class and outside is really important. So I wrote the book. I basically tried to write it like I teach, and that was nice because talking to students, I think, is the best way to try to communicate. And I pursued a bunch of different case studies. If I see the book right there, yeah, I mean, some of them, they're old and important, like the protocols. Some of them are very crazy, like chemtrails. Some of them, to be honest, are hard to write about. I did a chapter on Sandy Hook that the publisher wanted because your students, we're educators, we're part of that story, like it or not. So we dove into it, and I'm covering Sandy Hook this semester, like I will every semester. So we're doing 9/11 now, and a lot of, well, obviously all you people in the classroom weren't born, I think, with, well, maybe your teacher. I'm assuming he's not that old, but I have freshmen who were born in 2005. So, this is not a memory to them. This is kind of an abstract thing like the Middle Ages or the Alamo. Um, and I was even saying, I said, in a few years, I'll be teaching students who were born after COVID, which is interesting. Time passes, but the conspiracies roll on, and I'm always adding more to the list. I'm actually updating that book even now because events are fast. Things change. We have a lot of court cases now. Even more evidence comes to light. So yeah, that's kind of the brief gist of it.
Do you want to talk about some of the updates on what you had and then how it either adapted or changed or how you added to it?
Yeah, I think I remember from your email these guys are really interested in Kennedy.
That's usually like a fan favorite. Yeah, and the one kid that's obsessed with it didn't come today.
Well, we'll talk about it, but let's not tell him anything. All right? No, I'm just kidding. No, we want to keep it a secret. I think one of the biggest things that I've had come across my desk regarding Kennedy is Oswald's trip to Mexico. Okay? I remember back in the 90s when you start seeing that slow trickle of declassified documents starting to come out. And he went to Mexico City, right? And the FBI tracked that journey down to the point where they actually interviewed every single person that he rode in a bus with to Mexico City to try to figure out what he was doing there. He contacted the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy. And that's where the story kind of gets blurry because nobody knows why. The theory is he was trying to go back to either Cuba or the Soviet Union because he didn't want to be in the United States anymore. There's actually tape recordings because the CIA was tapping phones at these embassies. And we're trying to figure out if the voice that you hear is actually Oswald's. Did he speak fluent Russian? How good was it? He didn't speak Spanish, so what we got are these really old tapes of somebody talking. So it's not really clear, but you could read into that almost anything you want. Is he a CIA plant? Is he a front man for a bigger operation? There's absolutely no idea. What I've have is basically the fact that the agency and the FBI were avoiding him almost at all costs, partly because the FBI missed him when they were getting Dallas ready for the motorcade and Kennedy's visit. The CIA had no interest in him whatsoever because he really wasn't a valuable source dealing with Cuba. They had bigger plans working at the time. So whether or not he had a relationship is really up for grabs. I guess the problem is we don't know. There's still not enough. That slow trickle might answer some questions, but it's still going to take a lot of time. And what people are doing is filling in those blanks in the meantime and making assumptions, which is always a problem when you get down to stories this important. So that's one of the things that I still struggle with when I teach. A lot of the other ones, I mean, the kids love the moon landing conspiracy. Um, and you can even watch that on Mythbusters if you want, that old show, because they did it, right? There's so many little features. Can a flag wave like that in a vacuum? Yes, it can. But I always like asking my students, I said, when I was a kid, I actually watched the moon landing and I knew NASA was a big thing. You probably had something like 250,000 people working for NASA. How hard do you think it was going to be to keep a secret among 250,000 people when you really get down to it? You ever talk about that, like keeping secrets? I know you guys do that. You do it with your teacher right there. You do it with your parents. What's the rule of thumb? The more people involved in a conspiracy, what's the likelihood it gets revealed? What do you think? High or low? Probably pretty high. So that's like the old joke. You can have three people in a with a secret, and then you'll keep it as long as two of them are dead. Well, that's true if you're working as a spy, but if you're trying to wrangle the whole NSA, or NASA, that's a whole different story. So I'm fascinated with the moon landing because there's a lot of good visual stuff. But there's a lot of other things, just basic common sense things to think about. So those are the two updates that come to mind. I mean, January 6th is one of the bigger ones, I talk about now. And we've been buried in new evidence from Congress, from newspapers, from everybody. When I wrote that book, I had no idea. I watched the January 6th hearings. I have them. I cannot believe how much more evidence they found of people who were armed in the mall. You have Capitol Police reports of people with rifles up in the trees, and a laundry list of confiscated weapons when the president made his speech. So I was kind of gathering up bits and pieces. I found an interesting newsletter from the Virginia State Police that had a guy attacking a policeman with a sledgehammer that he brought to the protest. That's not normally something you bring to a protest. So it kind of stood out. But there's been this deluge of evidence since, and that's something else I'm sorting through. We got a little bit of hindsight on COVID, but if you look at the numbers in that chapter, they're way lower than what they are now, which is, a sad story that we all know because we're right about the 4th anniversary. So what I did was I got my publisher and I said, we really need to do an extra chapter here, just kind of capture all this stuff and update it more because this story changes constantly. And I don't think that's ever really going to stop. So that's kind of the short version of that, if that makes any sense.
Do you run into flat earthers in class or maybe outside of that?
Oh God. Yeah, the flat earthers are awesome. Yes, I guess the short answer is yes. So I'll put it to you this way. We're doing hard science, right? And I'm not a science guy. My sister is a microbiologist. And I don't know, some of you guys are probably interested in it or you're really good at math. And generally, Americans are really bad at both. You look at scientists and they're like wizards or shamans, they're like soothsayers. And I think the problem is you need a basic understanding of really complicated things. So you think that, it wouldn't be that hard to prove the earth is round, but, there's a gap in there somewhere. And I think what you have in a lot of cases, it's like the chemtrail story. You don't know how contrails work. You just assume something else. And you could make the simplest possible explanations, but they're hard sometimes. If you ever watch Neil deGrasse Tyson on cable news or YouTube, I mean, he's figured out a way to translate complicated science to the layperson like us. and he wears, suit jackets with the constellations or question marks, and it kind of eases that in. But yeah, I get the flat earthers all the time and the chemtrail people. And I guess the bigger point I take away from that is at some point you can't argue people out of an idea, because it starts to be based more on faith than facts, and that's including science. That's really true with COVID. Um, we all became experts 4 years ago, but we're not. I mean, we all tried to read these, studies. We're not Anthony Fauci. I mean, none of us are. My sister is. She went to Johns Hopkins, and she just looks at the rest of the people and she kind of shakes her head, because I don't think she honestly knows where to even start when it comes to explaining things like this. We used to take on faith a lot of science, but we don't do that anymore. And that's true with everything in a lot of ways. That's true with probably kids at your school who don't want to get vaccinated. Um, when I was a kid, you didn't make that question. You just did it. It's a very different country now, all these years later. So I kind of took the flat earth thing and ran with it a little, but I hope that makes sense.
So you would say that there's a lack of faith in institutions, that we're cynical, and that we fill in all these ignorance gaps with kind of whatever maybe is convenient or already fits our bias.
I think so. I mean, it used to be, like I said, we take on as an article of faith that experts knew what they were saying. I don't, when I was a kid, you went to the doctor, you didn't argue with the doctor. You just, he gave you a prescription, you went home, you took it. If you had to, you followed guidelines. I mean, I don't think questioning's bad, but informed questions have to be what governs all this story. That's the problem. And you're seeing this now with virtually everything. I used to be on school board. School boards would create curriculum based on what teachers told them. Teachers are really under siege now because nobody believes you're experts either. And that's become, Bucks County, if you follow the news, that's become a hot spot for this kind of divisiveness. And it's been settled with elections, but we used to take for granted that, people accepted a faculty's expertise, but we just don't anymore. You almost have to prove your value as you go. That's not necessarily bad, but there's a limit. I'm saying this from 30 years in the classroom. It's kind of percolating even to where I am right now.
What is the chemtrails conspiracy? I've never heard of that.
So if you ever you look up in the sky and you see a jet flying over, and behind it, you see those trails of vapor behind the wings. So normally you associate that with a contrail, right? The engine is hot. It's at altitude. It's basically creating steam, right? It's like when you exhale, when you go outside and it's cold. An engine at altitude at 6 miles is going to create that exact same trail, that vapor trail. And it's basically a product of combustion and heat. Now that's what normally we assume that was, but somebody who thinks it's a chemtrail says, well, that plane is spraying deadly chemicals, right? And these chemicals are designed to, oh God, there's a whole laundry list. Part of United Nations depopulation programs, or it's a chemical designed for mind control, or you could just go on and on. So it's some insidious plot by FEMA, the UN, some type of star chamber that's there to destroy the world. And I honestly, I have a friend who believes that's true. So what a lot of people do is they start, they'll gather up like samples of rain or snow and send it off to labs. And they look for different elements in that sample to say, aha, there's the chemtrail sign. So a lot of people, they'll get a lab test of their pond water or a stream or, a puddle in their backyard and say, look, we found aluminum oxide. Now we got them. But if you ever read a science book, about 6 or 8% of the Earth's crust is made of aluminum oxide, right? So my science majors lose their minds when we talk about this, right? Because it's like, it's natural. But a conspiracy believer in chemtrails think that this is kind of the smoking gun. So you have people that gather these samples up and they're sending them to labs constantly, and they're posting them online, and they're all saying, we got them this time. There are websites for this. I mean, there's lots of them. There's a guy named Dane Wigington out in California. This is kind of his whole reason for being alive. He just constantly posts every day about chemtrails. And of course, he's got a PayPal link on his website where he also makes a lot of money doing this, which is possibly another reason this happens. But yeah, that's kind of the short answer. I got a chapter on it. There's a long history of this, but it's alive and well. Yeah, and they're basically saying, look, there's no more natural weather. The government's making it all, and that's what accounts for storms and floods and everything. It's not, it's not the world that's doing this. It's evil scientists.
So is it a feasible solution to send every flat earther up to the moon so that they can see the earth?
Well, no, you could just put them on one of Elon Musk's rockets, right? And shoot them into low Earth orbit and look at the curve of the Earth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've read a lot of books about this, and that story goes back, people trying to measure, you could see the curve of the Earth over the, how you measure it over the horizon. People have been doing that since the age of discovery. I guess the point is you could probably fly somebody to the moon, right? And they're going to tell you that's not the Earth, that's a giant hologram. I mean, there's always going to be the out. The term I discovered was called moving the goalposts, right? Because you could say, all right, here's your proof. And they're going to say, well, wait a minute, what about this? And it's going to be that kind of whataboutism that they're always going to come back with. And that's where, like I always tell my students, I said, you can only get so far with evidence. At some point, you're bumping up against faith or belief, and there's just not going to be a way to win. If you could try and be patient, and I think the real key here is to listen. And we're not good at that. We're just not good at that in this country. We like arguing. I mean, you've seen, how many threads have you seen online, right? And how quickly they can degenerate into this god-awful contest, right? Yeah, you guys, I mean, probably a few of you guys play on Steam, and you start fighting with people on your headsets and start cursing at people and making them, trash talking. We do that. We like that. But we like, conflict isn't going to get you to where you would need to go. And I think tuning your ear to listen is really the most important thing. So, yeah, you guys like the flat earthers. I think, I don't believe in it, but my God, it's hard to get them off of that perch. It's hard.
Can you give some advice for dealing with some people that are frustrated, friends, family members, and so on, even in the face of evidence? Because, maybe sometimes it works or you can plant seeds, but what advice or what tactics do you think works or you've seen work?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I did the QAnon chapter, there's actually there's a whole school of psychological counseling now that's come out of QAnon, because so many people have, kind of bought into the idea. It's like a callback to the 70s when people talked about deprogramming cult members. It's almost like that.
Can you tell them what QAnon is quick? Sorry.
No problem. So QAnon is a conspiracy that believes that inside the US government, there's this kind of cabal of bad actors who are trying to take over the government from within, right? Which is kind of normal, but then it gets weird. They also believe that this cabal kidnaps children to drain them of their adrenochrome to prolong their lives, right? And this is where you kind of work in the what about the children problem? Because apparently you guys are the target of QAnon because you're young and vital, and you're going to help old people like me live to be 1,000 years old. So it can get really weird fast. But a lot of people, well-meaning people who want to protect children buy into this because they want to try to find a way to fix a problem that's really not there in a lot of cases. But it's gotten wrapped up in politics. It's been part of campaigns. We have a congresswoman from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She posted a YouTube video where she totally believes this conspiracy, and she took it down. But of course, I found it because nothing hides on the internet. You know that. But you've got people elected into office who've campaigned on this idea, and it's dangerous, right? But it's also very prevalent and popular. So how do you deal with somebody like this? I guess kind of back to the question. I think confrontation is probably the worst process, because they're just going to dig in harder. I mean, it's kind of this idea, maybe you want to think about this, offer them alternatives, or ask them how they came to the conclusion they made. All right. But it's got to be slow and patient, and it can't be one of these kind of knee-jerk, Thanksgiving dinner, confrontations that we all end up doing with, that uncle who thinks of this and posts it on YouTube or Facebook. So it's hard. I mean, one of the things I learned raising a kid is that that's one of the things you really need when you're raising a kid. You got to be patient. You just can't make declarations and negate the other side. You got to kind of invite them in and start taking apart their story piece by piece to maybe have them look at it, not just you. So yeah, it's the therapeutic approach is going to be with us for a long time. And that really struck me when I was reading about QAnon because this has been going on for years. People are trying to find there's actually therapeutic communities among families now. It's almost like Al-Anon, where you're, meeting to try to discuss strategies. But yeah, there's no hard solution here, but it's going to take a lot of time.
Are there resources that are helpful for students to check out, especially if they're not sure? And maybe like a fact checker or anything like that, what can help high school students?
Oh, there's some great ones. So one of the guys I ran across years ago is a guy named Mick West, and he started a website called Metabunk. And I think I have the web addresses in the back of the book. He's an interesting guy. He made his money designing games. He did the Tony Hawk skateboarding game years ago, and he basically made a fortune, retired, and started a debunking website. So if you log on to that thing, it's got thousands of threads that cover everything. But what it has also, which I found really useful, it has moderated discussion, right? So you just can't wade in there and start, throwing ideas at the wall and hoping they stick. You have to do it, very carefully. You got to prove your points. There's referees, which I think is great. So you got websites like that one I think are really useful because you could almost find anything you want on there. Good podcast I listen to a lot is called Conspirituality. And it breaks down a lot of these conspiracies and they discuss them. They have guests, they have recommendations. I've found a lot of good authors. Actually, I ran across a woman named Renee DiResta, who's at Stanford. And she runs basically, she has an entire foundation, and what they do is go after misinformation. So you have academic sources, podcasts, independent websites. There's plenty. I'm giving you three, but there's a lot like that really do a really good, legitimate job of this. And they're great, and they're all free. I mean, they're great resources.
What advice can you offer to history students?
Are you guys all history students? Nice.
So this will be like a history, maybe a misnomer, but like a social studies club, and we'll like try to create content. We'll do some like events here and there, and then we'll talk to a bunch of folks like yourself.
National History Day is a great way to kind of get your feet wet. I mean, I've refereed that down this way. I was talking about Watergate in class, and there was a great kind of a practice that newspaper editors make reporters do, and when they're good reporters. If you're going to say something, find maybe 3 ways to corroborate it. You always want to have a balance with your statement. I always say you got to make a claim. It's got to come with proof, right? So what you're always doing is holding yourself responsible to what you're talking about, right? And every time you're ready to say something, in the back of your head, think, all right, I better have a way to make sure I can prove that, or I can at least substantiate it. The other thing I'd say, treat the audience that you guys have like a jury. I always say that when I teach. I said, you're never going to get 100% absolute positive, I got this down. I know exactly what happened. What you have to go for is reasonable, right? When you say something, I want it, start with 51% and make it, the best case you can, but you're never going to have complete certainty ever. And always assume that someday the evidence might appear, it might evolve. It took 30 years for good data about Kennedy to come out because we just didn't have the technology to evaluate the magic bullet. Gerald Posner found a lot of good stuff, but it took time. Sometimes it's going to take decades to get a document declassified, and all of a sudden it changes the story. So, keep stuff like that in mind. Make sure you got some facts behind what you're trying to say, and always assume you're never going to get that audience to believe what you're saying 100% of the time. All you can do is your best, right? And then you got to let it go and let the audience decide what they think. So I'd say that. I mean, that's stuff that came to me over time because I used to love to win arguments, but that's not what teachers are for, right? Teachers are there to get you guys started. And then you kind of shepherd them through and hope they don't, not too many bumps and bruises along the way. That's what good teachers do.
So you talked about the QAnon stuff, like the people that believe in that stuff. Do you think that the January 6th insurrection had anything to do with that?
Oh, absolutely. One of the best things, golly, when you talk about evidence, right? Think about it this way. You've got a bunch of people who are sending selfies to the internet throughout the entire January 6th riot. Everybody kept records of everything they did. So you've got thousands of pictures. And if you look, you're going to find a lot of people wearing QAnon merch. I mean, they're right there. They got flags, sweatshirts, hats. And they're there because they really did think Congress was part of this immoral child, abducting cabal. So there's tons of stuff like that. I even found, of all things, I found a guy wearing a Kutztown hat at the January 6th riots, right? I'm thinking, oh God, I hope he's not an alumni, but he probably is, right? So nothing escapes. A lot of private groups actually tracked phone data where they could locate people at the speech in front of the White House, and then they could watch them walk all the way directly to the Capitol building because their phones were their GPS. I mean, they could show you exactly where. But if you track some of those QAnon websites, Facebook groups, and then later on when they got kicked off of Facebook, Instagram, Parler, MeWe, all you need to do is get into the old internet time machine and you can follow all those posts. I'll give you an example. Doug Mastriano, who ran for governor, right? He's a QAnon believer. He denied he was there until people found the Instagram posts that he put, online, right along with his statements. And I have a friend who's a reporter in Bucks County. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests on letters that he wrote to Congress. I got them now. And the QAnon message is right in there. So the book I wrote, I actually did completely online, and it's incredible what you can find. So if you want to suss out QAnon data in January 6th, you can do it. It's not that hard. And generally, you could actually find people who've already done it. And there are plenty of private foundations that have worked with the FBI that have ended up convicting hundreds of these people. And a lot of that evidence is now public record. So, yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit if you want to look. It's pretty impressive.
So something I dealt with last school year, Tucker Carlson like online posted, I guess, like on-scene footage. It's supposed to be breaking, and this leads some to kind of like almost double down on it was peaceful and it was the FBI or Antifa or Kamala Harris or the police let them in and wanted them to do this, and it was, while at the same time all these prisoners are oppressed somehow. Like I'm not really, if they're Antifa, then I'm not really putting that together. But do you have like a response to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so when you want to look at the story, you have to look at it in totality. You've got to look at all the record. And I think the term I use a lot is cherry picking. If you've got two officers confronting 500 protesters, they're not going to hold the line. They can't. So what the police are trying to do is damage control. They're trying to limit damage and distract the crowd and so on. It's not until way later that you have any numbers to try to resist, and it's a free-for-all. Police in riot gear fighting it out with these guys with bear spray and blunt instruments and, everything from, like I said, sledgehammers to crowbars and, all of it. What I would look for is a timestamp and when something was taken, where it was located. How many police were originally deployed around the Capitol? I don't think it was even 100. Nobody was prepared for this. And there's a fault of command and intelligence, but no, I mean, we're back to this idea of what is a norm. I mean, nobody expected it. So, now they are, right? But now you have, steel reinforced fencing and National Guard. We try to apply lessons afterwards, but before the fact, no one ever, I mean, there's no precedent for this. That's a problem. I was talking about this with 9/11. It's, we call it the incredibility factor. I mean, this is beyond your imagination. You don't think it's going to happen, so you don't prepare for it. I mean, when I was a kid, it was a different world. I mean, 50 years ago is obviously a way different country than today. Yeah, I'm getting a little bit, more philosophical, but I mean, what Carlson does is he cherry picks. And And it, this to say these were tourists. I mean, you could find a screenshot of people walking through the rotunda. Sure, but I show pictures of people. I mean, who goes to a tourist event wearing body armor and ballistic helmets? I would go back to the court record. I mean, you have the the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys. I mean, you can establish networks of preparations before the fact. The biggest revelation I got out of the January 6th committee was the extensive plans for false electors, pressure on state government officials, and not just Georgia, but Michigan, Arizona. I mean, that kind of staggered me. I didn't realize how elaborate this was, because there's no way this is spontaneous. So again, totality, all of it, as opposed to Tucker finding a screenshot of two cops standing in front of a door. So, I mean, I think one of the reasons he got kicked off of Fox is because a lot of those claims ended up costing Fox a lot of money when Dominion sued. And I'll just finish this out because it's a great question. The best place to look for this story and how well it holds up in reality is find where it ends up in court. Is one of the things you can't escape in front of a judge is evidence. If you don't have it, it's not going to work. So you look at the number of lawsuits after 2020, I think there's like 65 of them. A tiny handful made it. I mean, we're talking one or two. And a lot of, you read the judges' decisions. Doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter who appointed them. They can't believe this stuff ended up in front of them. Look at Rudy Giuliani. I mean, what happens with his career based on what he did outside of the law? His credibility is subject to that practice, a bad practice. So anyway, the list goes on, but I hope I didn't talk too long.
No, that's good. And then my follow-up would just be, I think what you say, the goalposts then move to say, well, they were rhinos, or it was a Democratic judge, so it doesn't count, or the evidence doesn't count, and so forth. But let me ask you this, why history is important, and you have about 2 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, I see the timer. I better think fast. I think it's important to be informed before you make a choice. We're talking about 9/11 today. And I was asking my class, how many people knew where Afghanistan was on a map in 2001? When you go into a voting booth, you're making really important decisions, and you have to have some understanding about how things work. So I think that's one reason. When I talk to parents, they say, why should my child be a history major? I said, well, you're going to gather up a lot of facts, and you're going to be able to talk about them and write about them. What you're going to have to do is synthesize what you know and then talk about it in front of people. And that's a really good skill. And it has, a lot of respects that you're never going to have to apply it to history, but you could apply it to anything. So it could come down to, why should I hire you? And you're going to have 5 minutes to tell them about your life story. And you better have your ducks in a row. And that's what studying history helps you do. So I'll give you those two things, because that's why I've done it. That's why I still do it. But you have value beyond just that one discipline, I think, is what I always tell people. So there you have it.
Thank you. And thanks for meeting with us.
Oh, anytime. You guys have any follow-ups, you let me know. I'm busy, breaking out the red pen for my undergraduates, but I'm glad to set aside time for you guys.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
You take care of yourself and listen to this man.
See ya.
We'll see you.